There's been a lot going on with Venezuela, so I wanted to do a quick FAQ to give you the basics. If you're watching this on YouTube, the questions are marked in chapters, so you can jump to the ones you want, but I'll put the timestamps in all my descriptions. Question 1. How and when were the US strikes carried out? Just after 2 a.m. local time on the 3rd of January, the US launched a military operation from both land and sea. The operation targeted Nicolas Maduro's compound in Caracas. Maduro and his wife were captured by US forces, transferred to a US naval vessel, and then flown to New York. US officials say the operation involved more than 150 aircraft and took months of planning. The US military says its forces came under heavy fire, but reported no US fatalities or equipment losses. Venezuelan authorities say dozens were killed, including Cuban citizens. US officials have said many of Maduro's bodyguards were Cuban. Question 2. What is Maduro charged with? Maduro was first indicted by the US in 2020, long before this operation. That case was brought by the US Justice Department. The charges stemming from the 2020 indictment include narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. The case is being handled in the Southern District of New York. After his capture, Maduro and his wife were arraigned in federal court in Manhattan and pleaded not guilty. Their next court appearance is scheduled for March the 17th, but any trial could take years. Question 3. Was the US operation legal? Technically, no, not under international law. The UN Charter bans the use of force against another state except in self-defense or with UN Security Council approval. Neither condition clearly applies here. There's also the issue of sovereign immunity. Under customary international law, backed by International Court of Justice rulings, sitting heads of state enjoy personal immunity from arrest. The Trump administration argues that Maduro is not the legitimate president of Venezuela and therefore does not enjoy sovereign immunity. Ultimately, it'll be up to the New York judge to decide whether sovereign immunity applies in this US criminal case. Domestically, there are other legality issues because the US Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to authorize war. The administration didn't go to Congress. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says they didn't need to because this was a law enforcement operation, he said, not a war. He also said notifying Congress could have risked leaks and endangered personnel. You may also hear officials mention the Monroe Doctrine. That's a Trump rebranding of the Monroe Doctrine, a 19th century policy meant to block European influence in the Americas. Over time, the US used it to justify its own intervention in Latin America to ward off European pressures. To be clear, the Monroe Doctrine was never binding law. It's a political doctrine, not legal justification. But we've seen with this administration that it will proceed regardless. Question 4. Who's in charge in Venezuela now? After Maduro's capture, Trump said that the US was in charge of Venezuela.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
A day later, Rubio clarified that the US is not running day-to-day governance, but instead running Venezuela's policy to ensure it aligns with US national interests. On the ground, Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, was sworn in as acting president. Trump said his administration was dealing directly with her and threatened a second wave of strikes and further repercussions if she didn't cooperate. Rubio added that the US would keep using its leverage, keep Venezuela under what he called a quarantine, using the US military presence, enforcing sanctions, and continue to seize sanctioned ships, as we've seen. Question 5. Why didn't Venezuela's elected opposition leaders take over? There have been many parallels being drawn between now and what happened in 1990 when the US went into Panama and captured its leader at the time, Manuel Noriega. He was also brought to the US and tried. But in that case, Panama's opposition leader was immediately sworn in, so there was no vacuum of power. Today, many Venezuelans are relieved to see Maduro out of the country. Maduro and Hugo Chavez before him ruled Venezuela for more than 2 decades with an iron grip on power. Now Maduro is gone, but much of his system is not. The Trump administration left key figures in place, including the Interior and Defense ministers. Rubio said much of the opposition leadership is still outside the country, and the US is dealing with the immediate reality on the ground to prevent destabilization and chaos. He says the next 2 steps of the US plans will include what he called the recovery phase. That would include the rebuilding of civil society. And then the 3rd phase, which he said would be the transition period, although there's no timeline for this. Question 6, where's the opposition? In 2024, opposition-backed candidate Edmundo Gonzalez claimed he won Venezuela's election, but the result was annulled and Maduro stayed in power. Gonzalez is now outside Venezuela. He has welcomed Maduro's removal and called for the release of political prisoners. Another key figure is Maria Corina Machado, a Nobel Peace Prize winner and perhaps the most popular opposition leader. She was barred from running for office and is also now outside the country. Trump was asked why she wasn't installed to replace Maduro.
I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect.
Now, despite that public snub, Machado praised the operation and praised Trump specifically. She even offered to give him her Nobel Peace Prize.
I certainly would love to be able to personally tell him that we believe the Venezuelan people, because this is a prize of the Venezuelan people, certainly want to give it to him and share it with him.
Question 7. What's Trump's motivation? Is it all about oil? The administration's objectives appear to have shifted. Initially, Trump framed this as a war against narco-terrorism, but he has also openly pointed to Venezuela's oil. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, but much of it is heavy crude. The US needs that for gasoline and diesel, but this type of oil needs refining. The US has the refineries to do the job, but even Trump said Venezuela's oil infrastructure was old and dated and would require lots of money to update. That could take years. So would the US want to wait that long? Well, there's a more immediate plan. On Tuesday, Trump posted that Venezuela's authorities were turning over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the US, which would be sold at market price. Trump says he will control the proceeds, he says, to benefit both countries. This is oil that's already been produced and sitting in storage because US sanctions limited Venezuela's ability to export it. Question 8. Can the US just take Venezuela's oil? According to Trump, Venezuela's government is handing it over. But he also has repeatedly suggested that Venezuela owes the US.
We're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground, and that wealth is going to the people of Venezuela and people from outside of Venezuela that used to be in Venezuela. And it goes also to the United States of America in the form of reimbursement for the damages caused us by that country.
For context, in 2007, then President Hugo Chavez increased state control of Venezuela's oil industry. Foreign companies from around the world were forced to accept minority stakes or leave. Several US companies refused, had their assets seized, and later won partial compensation through international arbitration. But that did not make Venezuela's oil US property. Venezuela's oil belongs to the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan people. Marco Rubio later added that the US is selling the oil on Venezuela's behalf at market prices, something Venezuela has struggled to do because of US sanctions. What's not clear is how much of that revenue the US will keep and what will be passed on to Venezuela. There's also another US motivation: keeping Venezuelan oil out of the hands of the likes of China, one of the major buyers.
We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
So Maduro's gone, but Venezuela's future is uncertain. Could this be a pathway out of the Chavista era for Venezuelans? Perhaps. But will Venezuelans be willing to let the US run their country? The Venezuelan government has begun releasing political prisoners, long demanded by opposition and human rights groups. Reporting from Caracas describes uncertainty, but also an uneasy calm, at least so far. That's it for now. I hope this was helpful. If you want more explainers like these, follow my socials and subscribe to my YouTube. Thanks for watching.